Hi, my name is Joe Jackson. I'm a journalist, author, interviewer, and broadcaster who actually moved into the world of the media simply because, after meeting Leonard Cohen in 1985, I felt so transcendent that I decided I must seek out more of my music heroes to talk with. Apart from Elvis and Sinatra, I met most. And my hope in terms of these podcasts is that I can evoke for listeners even 1/10 of the joy I felt being able to sit and talk with people whose music had been so central to my life. That certainly was the case one day in 1990 when I interviewed David Crosby and Graham Nash on the afternoon of a gig Crosby, Stills and Nash were performing in Dublin that night. Sadly, as someone who actually enjoys researching the subject of my interviews, I was not prepared when at the last moment I was told that Stephen Stills also wanted to talk with me. But let's leave Nash and Stills until another podcast. Here I want to pick up on the part of the interview with David Crosby after we talked about the early influence classical and jazz had on his music, alongside rock and roll, of course. I remembered reading somewhere that people who come from a privileged background have a particular perspective on the world, and that they can, though I didn't say it this way to Crosby, treat the rest of us as if we were put on earth purely to feed their needs and to add to the pleasures they see as their birthright. By the way, if you want to read the Crosby, Stills and Nash interview as printed, check out my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com. We joked earlier about you coming from a relatively privileged background.
I did, yeah. My father was a filmmaker, a cinematographer, and we were, I would guess you call it upper middle class, in L.A., and
They say when you look, they say if you're dividing up the difference. I was just talking to Graham about his working class background, and he said that the opposites there helped you and he click immensely on all those levels, chemically, musically, class wise, and that.
all of it.
When you read of someone from a moneyed background, it suggested that you or they would have a kind of look on the world as a plaything, that almost pleasure is your birthright.
Elitist kind of approach, yeah.
No, I don't only mean elitist. I mean because it can lead into drugs and your other excesses.
Yeah.
That you almost look on the world as this is there to give me pleasure. You know what I mean? Is that any? Did you feel
There
that
might
was
be
your
some of that,
birthright?
because I've always, I always have wanted to have a lot of fun.
Right.
I've never struggled,
Right.
and I think it did damage me in a certain way. I'll tell you exactly. When I left home, I did, experience being completely flat broke and having to,
Right.
work to get $5 in a day was like a big day. That was like working basket houses in New York,
Right,
where
right.
you'd pass the basket after you sang, and whatever you got, that was how much you ate that day.
Yeah, okay.
Well, that helped a
Okay,
lot.
Right.
So did hitchhiking, from New York to Toronto. So did like being out in the world and living in, rough circumstances, having to support myself. That was all very good for me.
Right.
But the fact is that I won very early. Even those periods of time, I was having a great time.
Right.
And
right.
very shortly thereafter, I won in the Birds.
Yeah.
The brass ring dropped right squarely over my nose, and then bigger than hell, I won bigger than that.
Sure,
in
sure,
CSN
sure.
and CSNY, and so I never had long, protracted, soul building kind of struggle.
Well, you had that later, and we can talk about
Had it
that.
later on, yeah. But what it did was it gave me maybe not, maybe too easy a time,
Right. In terms of structuring the soul or getting some kind of substance down there.
I think, I don't feel that I really came to that until I was in prison.
Right. Yeah. That's what I felt from the book anyway. That is the sense I got.
I think it's probably true.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that's bad, good, or indifferent, but I think it's probably true.
Yeah. But you also, I mean, you were looking for. I know you were drinking cough syrup at 16.
Yeah.
Isn't this one of the kicks you got? And rum and coke. Was it
Yeah, I
rum and
always
coke?
wanted to be loaded.
You know
I
what
always
I mean?
wanted to be loaded from the very first time I could remember it. I ate
For the kick. For fun.
something. I don't know, man.
Right.
Some of us are tilted that way.
Right.
I can't tell you. I can't explain it to you. I know
Right.
that it was a natural thing for me to want to be wacko,
Right.
and I was every way I could be from the first minute I could work it out.
Right. What about wacko? One thing I did get from the book was a sense of sexual reserve in terms of writing about it.
Like even when you talk about the first time with a woman, you don't even use the word sex, and you link it immediately to your mother maybe knowing. Is there a kind of Puritan
No.
shadow hanging there?
No,
or are you just
I
being...
was, I was, if anything, the most flagrant.
Oh, yeah, that's that out the window.
Yeah. No, man, my thing used to be to get into, like groups of people
Right.
and, move hither and thither and yon.
But
And
even from 16 onwards, were you that liberated, that uninhibited?
Yeah.
From the beginning?
Sexually, tremendously uninhibited person. I have, whatever it is, I've done it. And usually enjoyed the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And
Without the baggage of guilt that a lot of Irish people would feel and that kind of stuff?
definitely.
Yeah.
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 I was out there. Right out there. And then as I got more stoned, I got more kinky.
Right.
And until I was like quite kinkified towards the end there. But even in the more healthier periods earlier on, I was, my favorite thing, triad was,
Yeah,
to
was three people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
I loved three people. I thought three people.
Did it matter about their sex?
It turned out not. No,
Right.
it didn't. I started out, of course, naturally thinking, two girls, one guy,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
can do this and you can do
Yeah,
this, and
yeah.
I'll just sit here and it'll be great. And I was terribly self-serving.
That's what it sounds like.
Had
right.
no idea about making love and stuff. It was all very,
Right.
I was a very greedy for pleasure kid.
Right, right.
But it turned out later on, that it didn't really. It could go either way, and it wasn't
Didn't
really
matter.
that big a thing. It was kind of a good adventure either way.
But doesn't one of your female lovers, I can't remember, maybe her name is Shelley, if I'm getting the name right, talk about how she felt excluded from your threesomes? That you have one shot, and if she doesn't get it, she's a woman left dissatisfied.
That's always
what I
been
mean?
true, man. That's always
Yeah,
been true.
yeah.
The fantasy, the harem fantasy, is pure fantasy. Any healthy woman can fuck any 5 guys into the ground. And
Right,
no guy,
right,
no man that I know in the world can really take care of even one woman. Let's tell the truth
All
here.
right, okay, we're into honesty.
That's the truth, That's the real truth. The rest is fantasy, sheer fantasy. But of course, I lived in a lot of fantasy.
Right. But so would men have felt excluded? Would they have felt? I mean, would you have been the one getting most of the pleasure? Would anybody come back to you later and say, "David, that was selfish. Did nothing for me," or was it all? Or did you give a fuck what it meant to them at that point? See,
I probably did, and I probably tried to be such a smiley little guy that everybody would forgive me for my greed.
Well, that always worked, didn't it?
Yeah, it always worked pretty well.
Do you would Graham have been hauled into those threesomes?
No, Graham's a pretty private guy about that.
Is he?
Yeah. So
Because-
Stephen.
But Graham talks about being in love with you, and that could be read as sexually, and talks about you were
No,
all in love at the time. of making an album.
There's no question we love each other, but it's been as human beings,
Right.
He's an exemplary human being,
Right.
and I've learned a tremendous amount from him.
Right.
Right. He's got strength and honesty and givingness and an adventurousness of spirit that I find most admirable.
Right.
And I have sought to emulate him in a lot of ways.
Right. You do write in the book, and also James Taylor talked to me about it, about how people who get hooked on a drug turn the sexual hit into a substitute, and the person becomes only that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't that part of the syndrome that people who use it, when they glorify the use of, don't always talk about? That the recipient of your whatever becomes just another kind of hit for the drug you don't have, or you're using with it.
There's that too. And also you become obsessed with it, and on a very low level.
Sex.
Yeah.
Obsessed with the hit probably more than sex.
I'm obsessed with the hit and obsessed with sex, both.
Right.
Cocaine does that in particular. Part of the cocaine psychosis is to become very obsessed with sex and very, you look at Freud's writings and you can tell he was a coke addict.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
There's you become obsessed with it, and you also get a little kinky, and depending on where you start, you get maybe a lot kinky.
Right.
But you get obsessed with it, and when cocaine turns to freebase, your consciousness just gets lower and lower and lower and more insistent and more compressed until the world is about as big as the light spilling out of the lamp in front of you.
Right.
It's on the little glassware pieces and on maybe whoever's next to you, or between your legs, or
Well, the light's between her or his legs then, and what you're receiving from it. The only light.
yeah,
But doesn't it also leave you sexually incapacitated?
Yeah.
Can't it?
Yeah.
Which is the other side that people don't often talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
It leaves you unable to do fucking anything
Yeah.
except take it.
Noodle City. It's the truth. You know,
Well,
and heroin too, which I was like, I've been a stone junkie for years, you know, and
Right.
and heroin doesn't let you come.
Right.
You
right,
cannot.
Right.
I don't care. Bridget
Right.
Bardot and Jane Fonda together could not get you to come. You know,
With one another and you watching.
involved, dedicated work, brilliant work. No,
It still wouldn't work.
no, Noodle City.
Right.
I mean,
right.
even not necessarily Noodle City with heroin, but you could not come. So it's a fantasy life.
But you did also, you resisted.
I noticed we're sticking to the music though.
Yeah, I'm moving back to it now. There's something very interesting to me there. Well, no, there's a logical link to it. You know, well, I mean, things like, even you want to go back to the Birds, like 8 Miles High in all the history books is seen as the first psychedelic rock song. I mean, how much of the music was shaped by the fragmented worldview through drugs, through whatever?
Lots. The effect later on, I think, was probably detrimental. You know, I think I would have written Wooden Ships and Guinevere and those things, and maybe a lot more. When I look at Critical Mass, I think, God, you know, if you've been actually willing to work at it,
Right.
you could have written
Right.
some stuff
Right,
that
right,
would have, you know,
right.
gone further.
So would any of that be, I want to get the hit from the song, and I want to get it as, no, I don't mean a hit record, I mean the charge as quickly as possible, so you kind of push it to its conclusion when it really should have evolved in a different way.
I've done that as a writer for a really a long time. I'm only
Right.
now just starting to really work on songs over a long period of time. I've been so eager to finish a song and show it to you and get the approval.
Sure,
You know,
right.
Look what I've
Right.
got, you know. That I too often just go with the first hit,
Right.
you know, instead of sitting there and saying, well, but wait a minute, you know, this is really an incomplete idea, or this is, you know, pretty arcane, or this is not really accessible at all. How do I, you know, make it work way better?
Right.
I'm starting to do that now.
Right. Is that because you're clean now and you have to be clean? Or are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's because I have a much longer attention span now.
Right.
And because I'm an older guy and I've got, you know, more concentration on it, and because hopefully I'm getting smarter.
Did the Coltrane influence come through on 8 Miles High, and would that have come from you?
That was direct, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I played, the particular specific song is Africa Brass, and I played it, I was taken by it, just smitten by that song in particular.
Right.
And I played it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and I played it in McGuinn's ear endlessly. I did the same thing to him with that I had done to him before with Ravi Shankar.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I turn a lot of people into Ravi Shankar. Somebody just played it to me, and I went, oh, man, that's beautiful.
Right.
I think I might have been the one who played it to George.
I think, that's almost accepted as fact, isn't it, that the beat was being influenced by the Birds, by you at that point.
I don't know. It might have
Changed
it
there.
might have been. I think probably
Changed
two or
there.
three people played it for him, but that particular one nailed me. And the other one that I turned a lot of people onto was the Bulgarian folk music,
Right.
which was the first of those Bulgarian National Folk Choir and Ensemble records,
Right.
which was just a total stunner, man.
Right.
That one, I turned Nash onto that, and we both just were like incredibly affected by it.
So is it wrong then when you see to have it just reduced to 8 Miles High being the first drug song? They should also look on the jazz influence and the art and the other
It's never
reflections.
just
You know what I
one
mean?
thing, you know?
Fragmented.
It was also a real good.
Doctor, your
What a
full focus
fucking
here.
yeah.
Give us another 5 minutes.
Do we have another 5 minutes here?
Give us
Sure.
5.
Hello?
Because we're right in the middle.
The one thing we did talk about was you can become self-serving through the use of drugs and be blind to political realities outside. I mean, we were just talking about sexuality, but political realities when, like, For What It's Worth was written. I mean, there was also that element of you didn't turn away and you had your tirades on stage against who killed Kennedy and what are the names and all that stuff. I mean, you weren't that closed off from what was happening in society.
Not then.
Oh, later.
Later on, I got closed off. Back then, you know, there's a difference in different drugs, and there's a difference in the length of time you do them. When you are doing essentially just smoking pot and taking psychedelics, you're still pretty alive. They may not be the best things in the world for you, but you're not really shut down yet.
Right.
Pot can make you pretty lazy.
Right.
But you're not really shut down as a human, I don't think. Cocaine and heroin, later on, heavy use. You could graph my awareness of the world, in a reverse curve that matched the increased curve of the dope.
Right. But you were responding the night Robert Kennedy was killed. You were inspired right out of that, weren't you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all were all the way down the line. We were always we felt that we had every right to respond to the world just the same as everybody else did, and if we had better tools to do it with, then tough.
Who do you finally think killed JFK?
Well, that's a good question. My personal one?
Yeah.
I think that guys that were independent contract operators that worked jobs, the kind of jobs that the CIA would not do for themselves. Paramilitary guys working out of New Orleans did the actual work and were killed soon thereafter. I think it was paid for by H.L. Hunt. I think it was orchestrated by professionals who I don't think we'll ever know exactly who they were. But you got to understand, this is a guy who didn't send the air cover in at Bay of Pigs. So that entire community would have done it for free. You don't have to pay them.
Sure.
All those people, all the CIA guys and all the lower level guys that did CIA dirty jobs would have done it for free.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Because all their buddies died on that beach. And I think, he had made plenty of enemies. He didn't have to make the usual kind of deals that any president did. He had his own bucks.
Right.
Papa Joe gave him the bucks, and so he was very dangerous to the established people who have been running the country and the world, for since I can remember, the people who have all the money.
So how much of a turning point was that for people? I mean, the people, because we were saying earlier that you can turn into yourself, that a lot of young people at the point saw everything fragmented when John F. Kennedy was killed, followed by Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and everybody just gave up hope on a particular vision of the
I don't
world.
think we gave up hope then. It takes a long time to give up hope. It did blow us loose from society. We ceased to believe that we could work within the system. It's taken until now for us to get back to wanting to work in the system. Now we're staunch constitutionalists and people who go out and try to get people to vote. We have a voting registration booth at every gig we ever do.
Right.
Some of us work for candidates even, and we work for a lot of, causes. We try to work within the system now, but back then we pretty much felt that we'd been excluded from the system, that the system had failed us.
Right, okay. Yeah, I think I should talk to Stephen there.
Hi, Joe Jackson here again. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Joe Jackson Interviews podcast. And don't forget, if you want to read the article I wrote out of this conversation with David Crosby, check my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com.